So to get started, kick off our first panel, the title is Transforming and Expanding the Setting of Healthcare, How Medtech Can Prosper. Give you a little bit of background on this. Digital innovations have great promise to transform the clinician and patient experience through expanded access, different sites of delivery, and new therapeutic options. New technology may allow for earlier medical screening and diagnosis to take place in new settings, which can have us move away from the traditionally high-cost hospital-based care into mobile clinics, remote diagnosis, or wireless treatments even at home. So this panel will attempt to explore how medical device players can participate in the digital healthcare world. To introduce our moderator, Lisa Sunin. She's a managing partner at Venture Valkyrie Consulting, providing advisory services to companies and venture capital firms in the healthcare field. For 15 years, she was a founder and partner at Silos Group, a healthcare-focused venture capital firm, and prior to that, an entrepreneur in the healthcare field. Lisa, the podium is yours.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. I love this conference. First of all, there's just so many amazing and smart people here, and not the ones I'm usually stuck sitting next to, which is wonderful. Not that I don't love them, but it's nice to have a little diversity. Secondly, I'm particularly enjoying today because it's like the clash of the worlds for me. I spent the last 15, 16 years doing kind of half my work in the healthcare IT digital health side of the world and half my work in the traditional medtech side of the world. And I'm sitting in a room where all my medtech friends are, and Lisa Mackey, whose board I'm very excited to be on, really, really honored to be on. She's amazing. Missy Krasner, who's like my comrade in arms in the digital health world. And, Margaret, people who I work with all the time on the digital health side of the universe, Stacy, all kinds of people. So it's cool to see everybody in the same room at the same time, and I think it's emblematic really of what's going on in the world, which is they're not really separate anymore, even though people are trying to keep them so. I'm really happy to be here to moderate this kickoff panel, kind of introducing some of the issues around digital health. I have some great folks here, some of whom I know well and some who are more new to me, and I think we're going to have a really engaging discussion, and I want you to please feel free. I can't even see people in the front. I'm so damn short. Feel free to interrupt with questions along the way. Those of you know me know that Not Formal did not come with one of my panelists wearing a large plastic butt this year. Like last year, we'll try to compensate as best we can. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know, I did move from Silos. I'm on my own doing work around the same field now. But let me allow my panelists to introduce themselves. And one thing that's interesting about this panel is Linda's been in MedTech some, Anne's been in MedTech a lot. The others, not so much. So we're all sitting up here with, quasi-decent, not so much MedTech credentials in a MedTech conference. So this will be very interesting. But Anne, why don't you start? And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself real quick? And, what you think about this weird cocktail we've got going on.
Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Anne de Geest. Probably by now you ask, where is this weird accent? To make your life easier, I'm French-speaking from Belgium. So now we can move on. And Lisa told me to be really fun and controversial, so I'll please turn off the microphone. So I'm a serial entrepreneur and turned venture capitalist and turned strategic advisor to a large corporation. And where I started, since it's convenient here, you can appreciate, I launched pulse oximetry worldwide, which if Lisa asks me the right question later, can tell you how that, as a quantified self-person, had an impact in my life. And then I really coined the word health tech 25 years ago, so clearly ahead of the curve. and that's because I got involved in companies like Pyxis and Omnicell in the early days, VisiQ, which was two physicians from Hopkins who came to see me. And the problem I had at the time is that I was talking to my venture capitalist friends who were talking medtech and biotech, and I was trying to tell them I have nothing to do with healthcare IT. I'm in the front end. And of course, they were thinking buckets. So I just said, no, health tech. How do we use technology to change healthcare delivery? And my frustration, despite all these companies having $1 billion valuation and exit, going public, being acquired, is every time there was a new one, it was the same begging story. and my knees were really hurting. So I decided I'm going to start my own group. What the hell? And I started this group called MTech Capital, which is an ecosystem of venture capital and industry, but more importantly, accredited investors. A third of our members are physicians, so with deep clinical expertise. And the idea is that to understand this space, you need 3 sets of expertise. You need to understand healthcare, the FDA, the workflow, reimbursement, some of the irrational behaviors we have in the space, especially for the 22-year-old coming to fix us. And then
Thanks for gesturing at me when you said that. I appreciate it.
over there. Next room. And you also need to understand technology, not to put something over a mobile phone, but use mobility to change business models. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And the third aspect, which this industry never had to deal with, change behavior. We used to be physician-centric, super user. You give them the product, they know what to do with it. That is not the case in this space. We're only into market risk. We don't do product risk. And so we can talk about more of that. So, and then I got really tired of some of the demo days where all these young people do their 25 seconds of fame, and instead of bitching and complaining, which I do just with Lisa, I started my own conference called the MTech Conference, and this is in its 3rd year. So there's cards on your table. I did guerrilla marketing too, and there is also a drawing. If you checked in earlier, there is at the registration desk. If you put your business card in, we'll get a free admission this afternoon. And the concept of the conference was that there were all these companies starting, but they will come to us and they say, I have this shining object, and I say, time out. What's the pain point? What are you solving? How do you validate value proposition? Who is going to pay and why? And by the way, is there a lot of people willing to pay? And they couldn't really articulate that. So the focus of the conference is that we get everybody in one room, which is the providers. We have some of the big unmet need of the provider panels there, big names like Sutter, Stanford, Kaiser, all of that. We ask the employers, which is getting more power, and we also put investors in there, and we put everything in the room. We lock the door, and then we basically say, how are we, as the existing stakeholders of healthcare, taking leadership in changing healthcare, as opposed to have other people trying to do it for us. So anyway, that's the conference on October 14 and 15. I did my plug. I'll be good after that.
Linda?
Hi, this is my first conference, and my name is Linda Wilson. I come from actually the provider side. So I come from the side of irrational behaviors, as you described them. And those irrational behaviors are becoming worse and worse in the current environment, as many of you may have noticed. And it's all centered around control. Providers are slowly and more increasingly losing control. And so they act in a rather irrational behavior. In fact, being a CEO of a health system, I found that my job was more psychologist than anything else. So I come to the panel from that experience, and most recently in the last year, I've been working with LEK Consulting as an executive advisor, and many of you have worked with LEK in various ways. So how do I come to this space in digital health? I come with great frustration, to be honest, at the healthcare provider environment and how slowly we move and how many barriers we throw up. In years past, we've been able to control the environment, and when Medtech came to visit us, we were in control of the conversation, we were in control of the purchasing, and very often we were the experts that Medtech came to ask us what are the specific features and benefits that you need for your patients. It's all changed at this particular point and juncture, and consumers are driving the cars now and saying what they want, and so the providers, particularly the physicians, are in a panic mode and throw up barriers for absolutely no reason at all, and those barriers are proving to be very dysfunctional and causing us to stop short with heels locked in as far as functionality and as far as adoption are concerned.
I'll start with an amen. So my name is Lisa Serwin, and I run a company called App Medicine, which is one of the shiny companies that Anne referred to. And I come from the most irrational side, which is trying to change consumer behavior as well as provider behavior. So I decided to just, throw myself in there and be suicidal. I actually come to health tech via the entertainment industry. So I actually have a consumer products background, which made me sort of uniquely, in one way, qualified to run the company, and in other ways, uniquely, completely unqualified for what I was about to experience. I was famous in the entertainment industry for two things. I suggested to Disney that they buy AOL when it had a market cap of 70 million, and they told me I didn't know what I was talking about. There you have it. And then I was second famous for telling Fox that they needed to start changing their distribution windows. This is early 2000s, to date myself, because, and this is where it applies to health tech, and I was telling the story out in the hallway a second ago, I dared to suggest that consumers were going to want what they wanted, when they wanted it, at a price at which they were willing to pay. I then actually ran away from entertainment and went to a company called UniHealth, which doesn't exist anymore. And UniHealth owned 8 hospitals, a home health care dialysis system, and was doing physician practice management roll-up when, in fact, that was a thing. It was actually not a bad idea with a lousy business model, which we can talk about how that plays in. But so I've had this experience both on sort of the operating side and being on the board of directors of a hospital company and on community health clinics. I ran public policy, healthcare policy for the governor of Nevada for a couple of years. And then for some reason, I decided to come throw my hand into the startup business and jump back into healthcare market. And what's been so fascinating is that the conversations that I was having at UniHealth and frankly in the entertainment industry and around consumer products are the exact same conversations that I'm having today, all this time later, around healthcare and healthcare products and medtech. So it's sort of a different background, but it's one I think that's supremely relevant, particularly for the conversation at hand.
Great. I'm Margaret Laws. I head the Innovations for the Underserved program at the California Healthcare Foundation. And I'm not sure I would say I come from the even more irrational part of healthcare, but I certainly come from probably one that's less represented here, which is most of the work we do focuses on trying to bring healthcare innovation into underserved markets, so into Medicaid, before now into large uninsured populations. So what we do at the foundation and through the innovations program is we have both a grants program and an investment fund. So we make grants to do proof of concept, to do some early stage research, and then we have an investment fund where we are really trying to take innovation in digital health, health technology and healthcare services and help migrate it into markets that are Medicaid funded or otherwise serving low income or underserved folks. Sometimes we invest as a lead. We do seed kind of through Series A. We often invest alongside venture funds. Most of our investments, we have 9 now, started the fund in 2010. We're invested alongside venture funds, and we're really very specifically working with them and working with the companies to try to think about the things that need to be done to overcome the even more significant barriers, both on the consumer or patient side and on the provider side, and really on the system side, to try to get these beneficial technologies and services adopted in markets that are really, really difficult markets. And I have, as Lisa indicated earlier, really no medtech background, except that a few of the companies that I'm working with, iRhythm, Propeller Health, I think of as really device-enabled health information technology. So there is a device piece of this, and thinking about how to get that device into a system that can be a system that gets through the patient and provider challenges. And then really thinking about, again, taking it down the next level to language differences in consumer consumer literacy levels, is a lot of what we spend our time focused on. So excited to be here today and really to learn from all of you.
So, okay, you guys, I win the most irrational market contest. You came from provider, consumer, manufacturer, and government policy. I spent my whole career at payer and VC. I win, hands down. Okay, so it was interesting, one of the comments, I can't remember if it was Susan or Tamara, said that Missy did a great job making digital health digestible. And I think a lot of us probably feel that digital health is more like regurgitatable at this point because we're hearing so much about it. How many people are wearing like a Fitbit thingy or something equivalent in the room? How many people have one at home in a drawer? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's the way the world is right now. It's like this, everybody's interested in it, it's all the rage, people are paying crazy valuations for digital health companies that have pretty much nothing to prove that they're valuable. And you can't give away a good late-stage med tech company. I mean, what the hell, right? But there's all this fascination. And so one of the questions I have is, aside from the fact that we're obviously at a MedTech-based conference talking about digital health, is do you guys think, and I'll start with you, Ann, that the MedTech world is really taking notice of digital health, or do they still think it's a bunch of fitness fanaticists, you know, wearing Fitbits, running around being weird?
This is interesting because 3 or 4 years ago, I took, because I'm an advisor to a very big company on the pharma and the medical device side, I went to a very, very big cardiac company, and there's only 2 or 3 left, so I'll let you guess. And I went in there and I said, listen, you have all this information coming from your implantable pacemakers. Give it to us. You're paying a fortune for it. The physician's not really using it. We're going to basically digest it and give it to the patient and enable them. And literally verbatim, very senior person says, we don't care. The patient is not our customer. The physician is the customer. And I think one of the challenges that the large medical device company have is that the people who are in leadership positions there, they have been selling components. They've been selling accessories. They've been selling it to the super user, which is a physician. Their expertise in-house is material science. That's who you are. And you've done a great job at that. Unfortunately, I have bad news. You're being marginalized. And you're being marginalized because the industry is shifting. There's a lot of massive power shift. But the biggest one is that people don't want an ROI on a component and why use is slightly better than the other one, and portfolio extension and all the things we've done. What they want is a total solution to a patient in a population. And what that means is that the business models are changing, and I hope we're going to get a discussion on that. So the problem is that fundamentally we're talking about enabling the consumer. We're talking about changing their behaviors. We're talking about getting a total solution wherever you are, in the hospitals, outside the hospitals, post-recovery. And it's not just that component that you're selling. Some people are willing to go at risk. And so if you think about it, I'll just let you pause for a second there, but let's assume some of you are in the cardiac business or orthopedic business. How would you feel if we say, great, we buy your hip, but we want to pay you in 90 days, based how quickly the patient recover, how quickly they're mobile, what's the overall cost of the whole experience, and then you're going to go at risk for it, and if we do less than whatever is a flat rate we've agreed for that patient population there, you may get slightly more than when your component is or less. This is what the digital health company are doing, is that they are carving out patient population. They're going at risk for the whole experience. We don't sell components to the physicians anymore. And so I just want you to think about that, because when you start thinking in big companies, and this is what's happening there, it's just like Planet Mars and Planet Venus revisited again. So.
And to your point about Planet Mars and Planet Venus, I work with a bunch of bipolar physicians. I hope there's not too many physicians.
As if there's any other kind.
And have you seen your physician on their smartphone doing like this? And they're all excited, and a patient comes into their office and says, wow, that's really cool. Do you think I might be able to email you a question? No. And so the most basic way of communicating in the digital era via email is not an option for a patient, which is just amazing to me. And when the patient then asks, well, why is it that I can't email you a question? All sorts of barriers emerge. And that's what we're looking at, and it's very much related to what you just talked about, is because if I, as a physician, want to be able to control my reimbursement and be able to control my world, I do not want to start the process by having patients starting to email me. Now all of a sudden they're not coming in for a visit. Now all of a sudden I've lost control of the bundle, and it leads to complete chaos.
So if I may, you're hired. So at Medicine, I'm just going to do a quick plug only because she segued for me. We're working on connecting doctors and their patients, electronic visit, because it's really not just about email. So I'll take it from Ann a little bit further, and we'll talk about this dysfunction, right? So let's talk about EMR companies for a minute, right, and how MedTech and email and patient data and what Lisa's trying to do connects into that. They've all built patient portals, but who have they forgotten to think about? The patient. So what can I do with it? I can check how much money I owe you. Well, I don't really care, right? I can schedule an appointment. That's maybe important. But frankly, I don't want to come in for an appointment, right? And 40 to 50% of the things we go to the doctor for, we don't need to go in for. And hopefully we're all in the process of changing that as well. So we're going to go to Walgreens to get blood tests. So just send me the script for the test that I need, and I'm going to go get it, right? The fundamental relationship between provider and patient is changing it. The fundamental relationship between providers and MedTech is changing. Providers in the middle, they're not quite getting this yet, right? It really on a level at which they should. And MedTech has a profound advantage in some ways over what health tech's doing, because you're all really familiar with the provider and their office staff. You have long built-in term relationships. You have distributed sales teams. You've dealt with the regulatory environment. You're all comfortable there in a way in which some of the newer entrants like us aren't. But what we're comfortable with is direct-to-consumer sales, right? And innovating at a cycle that's different than the product innovation cycle, right? So we're, and I hate talking about healthcare cycles because we all know it's like a freaking 15-year bell curve, which is a disaster. But, the change is happening, and it's happening all around. And for those that aren't embracing it and sort of really trying to think about it in a way that's core to the strategy and not just off to the side, and I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had even with, some of the big players who are like, well, we haven't really thought about interoperability. We haven't thought about Bluetooth. We haven't thought about what we're going to, data is great, but data is data. It's the information that you get out of the data and what you're going to do with it that's meaningful. And I can't tell you how many folks have yet to even, they're starting to think about their strategy, right?
Yeah, just a really quick final point. I mean, as I think about this, you've got the thing, the device, and it sits on a platform, and that platform now has to work with this new workflow that everyone's talking about. So getting the thing reimbursed is a very small part of the problem. The problem is, what's the workflow? What role is the consumer playing? What role is the provider playing? And how do you actually get adoption? Great that you got the thing reimbursed, but if you can't get people using it in this new workflow, I think it's a really important point.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Reimbursement's usually the hardest thing, I think, for pure med tech. I mean, Missy mentioned regulatory earlier, and it's certainly one of the top two, but I actually think it's gotten worse on the reimbursement side. So it's interesting, the sort of the dichotomy there. If you can get reimbursement for med tech, you're probably going to get utilized. If you get reimbursement for digital health, you're going to be in a drawer.
Right.
So it's a really interesting dichotomy. So Margaret, to that point, you've seen lots of digital health, med tech combo companies come through. Have you seen anything really interesting where the med tech players are involved, engaged seriously with the digital health med techy type players, the Propeller Healths of the world, these guys?
Yeah, I think that we'll use Propeller Health or iRhythm as an example. In each case there was a device that went through a 510K clearance, and the device was a piece of the puzzle, and I think a really important piece of it, and in my opinion, a really important piece of it, because it was the thing that in some ways prompted the change in the workflow. So you had something, in the case of Propeller, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but a sensor sits on an inhaled medication, an asthma or COPD medication inhaler, and time and date and location stamps where people are using their meds, and feeds that information to a system which then needs to turn it into actionable information for patients and providers. And I think that this notion of the passive sensor, the sensor that fits into your workflow and your life flow, you're using your inhaler and that triggers it, was a really distinguishing and differentiating and important piece of this system. So I think to that point, without that, it would be, basically what it replaced was expecting your patient or consumer or child or you to data enter a bunch of stuff about your asthma. It didn't happen. We didn't do it. Patients didn't do it. So I think that the device component of that company and of that application is a hugely important one, because I think it really flipped it into a much more usable, in your life, patient-engaged application.
Anne, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, she asked me to be controversial. If you think about the Kodak moment, I think, honestly, the medical device, big players are having a Kodak moment right now. Why? If you look at what's going on with this innovation that Margaret is mentioning they don't come from you. These are basically not leading-edge technology. They dumb down medical device technology. They hire some of you engineers. Look at Apple. They basically build their own technology. They could have made a deal with some of you, but they didn't. And so the challenge that I have is that, The technology is just the enabler. It's not the one that creates the value proposition. The value proposition is to change, to give people clinical, actionable information that would change their behavior, that we can measure, we save money, somebody's willing to pay for it. The technology is just a tiny piece of it. None of them are leading edge medtech. And so the challenge is that you as an industry are no longer as relevant because people are not going to you to license the technology. They're just hiring a whole bunch of engineers to build it. And for me, what was a defining moment was 3 years ago. There was a Cooley-God where it had a CEO medical device conference there. And they had very senior people from the MedTech side. And then they had some senior people from the payer side. And literally, I forgot which payer it was, so I won't quote him, but he basically stopped the whole conversation on a panel and said, I will not reimburse another hip. Of course, since we had the hip guy on the panel, he was kind of white. And he said, this is what I need from you. Now remember, in the audience is all MedTech. And they said, I need a way to identify my population management who is depressed. When they are depressed, they change behavior, they start gaining weight, they become obese, they start having diabetes, they start having cardiac events. I want a way to identify them and intervene. How can you help me for that? And of course, the panel went silent. But that's the lack of conversation that we're having. And so when we talk about MedTech-enabled digital health company, do not think it's anything digital. That's really pushing the envelope. It's run-of-the-mill MedTech technology that's commoditized, it's available, and they just hire the engineers. They don't make a deal with you. And I will challenge this industry that you need to step up and really reach out. Do you own or work with some of these emerging companies there?
It's interesting. I mean, my current consulting practice, I'm spending a lot of my time consulting to big med tech companies about exploring digital health strategy, basically. Mm-hmm. And I find it interesting that so few of them have one yet. Mm-hmm. It's just, just starting, just approaching. We want to just learn, And you've seen things like Covidian, who's in Great Force here, has, acquired Zephyr Technology, which is a digital health company, has done a deal with Genea. Medtronic's done some deals, St. Jude backed iRhythm. I mean, there is activity, but it's very, atomic, not molecular. It's very interesting, and there's not a lot of clarity about how that's going to get spread through their, distribution channels and the like. So I find it fascinating. But Linda, I was going to ask you, in a world where med tech companies are trying to figure this out, do you see that they will actively engage with what I like to term the new healthcare companies, Amazon, Google, and Apple, or are they allergic to that?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I think the interface will be very limited to start with, and I think that as the large medtech companies realize that there has to be a way to change people's behavior, because what we're really addressing now in the healthcare market is being able to manage chronic disease. It's the most costly part of our healthcare environment. And the large big box players, for example, have not had a legacy of being very good at changing people's behavior. It's the smaller startups that understand this piece. And the large companies really have, they've got a corner on the market on design and creation and input. But as far as keeping people engaged and keeping them on board, it's a little bit more difficult for them. I would like to see, how do you keep, we have a fascination with new little tools and devices. And this actually brings to mind that in the late 90s, I was really involved in a population health project. We were very excited. We were able to address chronic illness at five different diseases. And here we are, this was in 1997, and here we are doing the exact same thing. And why is that? It's because we have never had all of the players united around this particular issue. So we've never had the payers on board, we never had the med tech companies on board, and we never had a lot of little startups that were really interested in this space. And so the challenge really is how do we all unite and collaborate and work together? And I really feel that our environment right now is ripe for this, and hopefully we'll be able to do this. But we talked a little bit about how easy the reimbursement is. I'm not sure I don't think it's as easy as we think.
So we've spent now, 30 minutes telling all the MedTech people they don't know what they're doing. So, so putting my other hat on, which is like, oh, the MedTech people really know what they're doing.
They do.
What do they know? What do they know that the digital health people don't know? What is their secret sauce that they're bringing to the party here? Because obviously they got something because they're big, and our digital health companies are itty bitty.
Yeah, no, I think they have an expertise that is missing. A lot of the tech innovation is coming from young, technologists who are going to be the next Steve Jobs. And I think they don't understand how irrational and complex. They don't understand the clinical workflows. I mean, the market is, I'm going on a limb there. I don't think the market is the fitness market. The real market is $2.7 trillion being spent, 75% on chronic diseases. And I think you need to understand how you integrate into where the providers are going, because it's changing, where the physician role is, because somebody has to interpret the data to help you. Not only the patient, but also the family and the caregivers. That's kind of the challenges too, is how to make this happen. So I think what's wonderful about MedTech is that they know how to navigate what's called the F word, the FDA, of course, just to make sure. And also the hospital selling cycle, which scares absolutely blew all the tech VC investors for
Right.
good reasons. So they understand how to do that. They also have the relationship to go to high levels.
Yeah.
And so what they need to do is to team up with these technologies to understand behavior modification. They know how to engage the consumer. You've never had to do that before. So we need both of them together.
Well, and let me add to that too. So the continuum of care, our definition of it has changed, right? So we used to sort of talk about from head to toe many years ago, and we talk about the sales cycle, and it's really now, it's really from the genome to the smartphone, right? So the having that regulatory experience, I mean, a 22-year-old is going to have a different experience trying to navigate, 510 clearance in the FDA and trying to sit down with the CEO of Sutter to get their product for a pilot so they can get the seed funding to get to a Series A so that they can have a proof point to even talk about a Series B, right? You all have those relationships already. You've all had those experiences in a way that many of us haven't. And so what feels really daunting to us is absolutely, back of the hand, second, easy for you. I don't want to say easy, but FDA is never easy. But, right, but you all have that and you have it in spades. And there is so much for both sides to learn. Workflow process in a provider office, workflow process in the hospital, understanding where your product fits and how to sell it in that cycle. I mean, as an example, and you can probably speak to this much better, both of you can speak to this much better than I can, but Kaiser, for example, now looks at sort of medical devices and healthcare IT, or whatever they even want to call it, through the same lens, which is, how does it affect my workflow? How is it affecting my staff? And how is it affecting my data? So they're using the same lens for both sides. So we have a lot we can talk about and work together on, and I think be much stronger on. And the regulatory environment and reimbursement, so for example, I'll just take electronic visits, my little subsegment, right? So depending on what state you're in, it's covered publicly. Depending on which private insurance you have, it might be covered. Medicare doesn't cover it. Medi-Cal covers it if you're rural but not urban and only in certain states. And you really just kind of want to blow your brains out, right?
Yeah.
Or your employer can cover it. Some of them do, right? So it's this whole hodgepodge, and we're starting to do some work on the federal level, but that is like such a microcosm of the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to jump to the end of my questions so I can get some of the audience questions. Fortunately, I forgot my wearable on my glasses, so I have to look like this. Anyways, so the question I have for each of you guys, quick answer is, where are the best areas? What in clinically, from a clinical standpoint, what sectors of health care, medical care, are the best for collaboration? What is crying out for collaboration between MedTech and digital health in your mind? Margaret?
We've spent a lot of time thinking now and working with our companies on how you demonstrate ROI. And I think at this moment in time, areas where there is a relatively quick ROI, so even more rapidly deploying remote monitoring for heart disease. We haven't done that yet.
Right.
So we're working hard on diabetes. We're working particularly hard thinking about mental and behavioral health. But I don't even think we've begun to scratch the surface of the one where we know we have ROI, and it's a really strong collaboration between MedTech and digital health. So that's where I would, if we can't nail that, I'm not sure how we're going to do the others.
Lisa?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think some of the chronic care is one, psychiatry is another, aging in place is a third, and actually some cancer, some oncology, and actually cardiology as well. It's one of my C's: chronic care, cancer, cardiology.
You left out podiatry.
Yeah.
You know,
great.
about 5 or 10 years ago, GE Healthcare did a wonderful project to use what they knew within Lean Six Sigma and transfer it into the healthcare environment.
Right.
It was extremely successful, and they did very well in changing workflow of physicians as well as patients. And what we need to do is take something like that med techs know really well, have tools and templates associated with that, and apply that to chronic disease and how you change behavior. All of us in the room that raised their hand and said their Fitbit is in the drawer at home, that's a behavioral issue, and we're not able to change that behavior fast enough. And the amount of money that goes into chronic disease because of lack of behavioral change is so significant. And so I would reiterate that collaboration that needs to occur within that space.
AliveCore is actually doing some good work in cardiology right now around that.
So, I mean, the way we look at it is slightly different. The ultimate question, who's going to pay? And so I'm extremely skeptical on the consumer market. Nobody has figured out a revenue model that works there. Even Nike kind of give up. The next one is the providers. The providers are really having their life being turned upside down with the fee-for-services going towards capitation. It's really hard to get their attention there. So the selling cycle is as bad as I've ever seen in my life. And so it leaves the payers. And then approach the payers, historically they want data. So what's been interesting is that people are coming up with new business models to say, okay, I'm not going to spend 5 years giving you 5,000 patients over 3 years so that you can give me an ROI. I'm not going to sell you an ROI. I'm going to go at risk. You're going to pay me enough so that I can deploy this to a patient. I'm going to define a population. And when I get certain outcomes at 90 days, something that's clearly defined, let's say somebody lose 5% of their body weight for prediabetes, that's the Meta Health model, I'm going to get paid. Guess what? You break all the business model selling cycles.
Right.
And so I think these are the one which is new business models going after very large population, hypertension, diabetes, I mean, God knows there's a lot of those, and really being very clever to break the selling cycles. And I think where you as a MedTech can help is that these solutions, they need sensors, which is the MedTech industry, and then what they bring to you is the ability of doing the analytics, because MedTech has never done big data, take this into something that's actionable, and then deliver in a way that somebody will change behavior, and hopefully measure in a way that somebody's willing to pay for it in a short period of time. And so these are the ones I think are going to be massive companies.
I think, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Shared Clarity. This is my favorite example of this right now. A company that was started as a joint venture between United Healthcare, Dignity Health, Baylor, and a few other hospitals. And they're taking all of the data of United Healthcare, Baylor, all these guys, Dignity Health, and looking at MedTech products used in those places for outcomes, side effects, whatever. Retrospective data, granted, it's not, a bunch of scientists in a room, it's data jockeys. And they're trying to figure out which MedTech products are the most efficient, have the best quote-unquote outcome in terms of lowest side effects, longest, shortest length of stay, and they're going to go out and contract with the 1 or 2 stent providers, knee providers, you name it, who do the best in that data analysis and offer those rates on a group basis to all the United Healthcare hospitals, which, by the way, includes those in Brazil. So, I think it's a really interesting, disruptive approach, to Ann's point, to MedTech, but it's also an opportunity for MedTech to think about how you play into that and join into that syndicate, get ahead of the curve before you're disintermediated. So we have no time. So there are 2 questions at the top of the list here on my squinty screen. The first one is from the audience is, what ways have you seen that the changing patient-provider relationship is influencing MedTech utilization? And Ann just talked about that a little, but does anybody else have something to add about how providers are changing their utilization of devices? in response to data and MedTech and
You know,
digital health?
It's very interesting. About a week ago, I was at one of the Blues, and they were talking about all this claims data they had. They had data that had to do with all sorts of behavioral issues, chronic disease, and being a provider for years and years, I said, well, it's kind of odd that the hospitals would really benefit from this. They don't know how to manage population health, and the bottom line was, we have no real way to deliver it to them. We have no real way, I mean, we can give this enormous database, but they don't have any interface to be able to use this appropriately. And that's where MedTechs and the e-health people can really play nicely, is how do you address that interface between the payer and the provider so that you can facilitate the sharing of data and that you can facilitate this. And your example is actually a very, very good one, and that needs to be really prolific around the industry.
Well, I was just at the Stanford Medicine this weekend there, and they show some data in the orthopedic area there where, they had capitated, 3 days before, 30 days afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the surgeon was basically participating in the saving. Guess what was the biggest savings? The change of the implants.
Yep.
And so as soon as this type of thing starts happening there, then suddenly the price of the medical device becomes a big issue there. And as the products get more and more commoditized, where you can really see a big difference as far as life savings there, there's going to be huge downward pressure on those items there, because now the physician is now motivated to provide the lowest cost.
Yeah, I saw the CEO of Alina speak, actually on a panel I did, at a MedTech conference, say when they went from 13 types of hips to one type of hip, they saved $7 million a year in inventory costs. And there was like a lot of people that fainted right after that.
Yeah, that's very true. I
Yeah.
looked at a pediatric hospital, and if you think about it, pediatric hospitals have to have all different sizes of
Right.
implants. And just collaborating with a med tech company, we saved millions and millions of dollars.
That concludes our panel today. Thank you very much, ladies.
How are you?
Oh, great. Terrific.
There we go.
That's great. He's fantastic.
Jason's
Okay.
He's